Chapter 7 from the Boxcar Children, A Big Meal from Little Onions. The next morning, Jessie and Henry talked about the queer noise. They did not tell Violet and Benny. Here's just a little black and white picture for you. What do you think it was? Asked Jessie. Do you think it was a rabbit? I don't know, said Henry, but I think someone was in the woods. I am glad we weren't hurt. Someone must have stepped on a stick and made it crack. What shall we do? Asked Jessie. Nothing, said Henry. Watch is a good watchdog. He loves us now, and if anyone tries to hurt us, Watch would take care of us. He would do more than growl, but after this we must not let Benny go into the woods alone. I'll keep Benny and Violet with me all the time, said Jessie. Good, said Henry, and keep Watch with you all the time soon. Good morning, Benny. Time to get up. Today you must build something for me out of stones. What is it? Said Benny eagerly. I'm not going to tell you, said Henry, laughing. You build it just as Jessie tells you, and you will see. Henry was so eager to begin work that he ran all the way to town. The doctor came to the door and, smiling, looked him over from head to toe. My mother will help you and tell you what to do today, the doctor said. She wants you to work in her garden. Mrs. Moore, the doctor's mother, had a sweet face and looked very kind. Good morning, Henry, she said. Do you know how to thin vegetables? Oh, yes, said Henry. I like to work in a vegetable garden. I haven't had much time to take care of my garden, said Mrs. Moore. There, see that? She pulled out a carrot. It had to come out, for it was much too near the other carrots. Yes, I see, said Henry. He began to thin out the carrots. Mrs. Moore watched him as he pulled out some of the little carrots and put them in a pile. He left the other carrots to grow. Then he began on the turnips. You are a good worker, said Mrs. Moore. I can see that. She smiled at Henry. You may thin out all of these vegetables. Then she went in the house and left Henry alone. He worked all morning. He thinned out the carrots, turnips, and little onions. The mill bell rang at noon, but Henry didn't hear them. He still worked in the hot sun. Then he saw Mrs. Moore looking at him. You have worked long enough now, she said. You may come again this afternoon. What shall I do with the vegetables I pulled up? Henry asked. Oh, I don't want them, said Mrs. Moore. Just leave them in a pile. Do you mind if I take them? Asked Henry. No, indeed. Do you have chickens? Then, without waiting for an answer, she went right in and said, You have done good work. Here is $1. Henry said thank you and was glad he didn't have to answer the question about the chickens. When Mrs. Moore went into the house, he took some of the little carrots and turnips and onion. If he had looked up, he would have seen Mrs. Moore in the window watching him. But he did not look up. He was too eager to get to the store and order some meat. When he arrived at the boxcar, Benny told him, The building is done. I helped with it. The building was a fireplace made of flat stones. Benny did a lot of work, said Jessie. He carried the stones and found wood for the fire. The fireplace was a very good one. The children in Watch made a hole at the foot of a big rock between two trees. Flat stones were laid on the floor of this hole around the sides. More big stones were put up to keep out the wind. Jessie had found a heavy wire in the dump and put a big kettle on it and tied the ends of the wire to two trees. The kettle hung over the fireplace, and the fire was laid. Besides the fireplace was a big wood pile. Fine, fine, cried Henry. You have done well. Now see what I have. The girls were delighted with the meat and the little vegetables. With Henry's knife, they cut the meat into little pieces. Then they filled the kettle with water from the fountain and put the meat into it, with a tin plate for a cover. Henry started the fire, and it burned well at once. Jessie cut the tops off the vegetables and washed them in the brook. I'll put them in after the meat has cooked a while, she said. Soon the water began to boil, and the stew began to smell good. Watch sat down and looked at it. He sniffed hungrily at it, and he barked and barked. The children sat around the fireplace eating bread and milk. Now and then Jessie stirred the stew with a big spoon. "It will make a good meal," said Henry. "Keep it boiling and do not leave it. When I come home tonight, I will bring some salt. And whatever you do, don't catch on fire." Violet pointed to the pitcher and the teapot that she had filled with water. "That's to put on Benny or watch if they should catch on fire," she said. Henry laughed and went happily on his way. He wished he could stay and smell the stew boiling, but he thought he ought to get back to work. So he went back to Dr. Moore's house. He was very happy when Dr. Moore said, "Do you want to clean up my garage?" The garage was not in good order. Dr. Moore laughed when he saw Henry look around to try to find a broom. "I must go out now," said Dr. Moore. "You just clean this place up." Henry began at once. First he opened all the boxes. On the biggest box he painted the word TOOLS, tools, with a long-handled brush and a can of paint that he had found. On another box he painted NAILS, nails. Then he picked over the things and put the tools into the toolbox and the nails in the nail box. This was fun for Henry because he liked to get things in order. Henry found a lot of nails that were bent and covered with rust. He put them in his pocket. "I'll ask the doctor for these bent nails," he said to himself. "They are no good to him, but they are fine for me. I can use every old nail I get." Then he washed the floor and washed the paintbrush. When Dr. Moore came home, he found Henry putting the brushes, paint cans, and other things on the shelf. My, he laughed. He looked at the garage and laughed again. He laughed until his mother came out to see what he was laughing about. "Look, Mother," he said, "look at those tools. Look at that shelf. Look at my hammers." 1, 2, 3, 4 hammers. Your hammer, my hammer, and 2 other hammers. They were all lost. "Can you use a hammer, Henry?" "Yes, indeed I can," cried Henry. "Take one," said Dr. Moore. "You found them all." "Oh, thank you," said Henry. He showed the doctor the bent nails and was told that he could have those too. He could hardly wait to start home because he was so eager to show Benny and his sisters his new hammer and nails. "Tomorrow will be Sunday," said Dr. Moore. "Will you come again the next week?" "Oh, yes," replied Henry, who had lost all track of time. "The cherries must be picked," said the doctor. He looked at Henry in a strange way. "We could use any number of cherry pickers if they were all as careful as you." "Oh, could you?" asked Henry eagerly. "Well, I'll come." So the three said goodbye and Henry started for home. He had another $1 and a pocket full of old nails, a hammer, and a pile of vegetables that he had left at noon. On the way home, he bought some salt. When he arrived at the boxcar, he began to smell a delicious smell. "Onions," he shouted, running up to the kettle. "I do like the smell of onions." "I like the turnips best," said Violet. Jessie took off the cover and carefully stirred in the salt, and Henry sniffed the brown stew. It was boiling and boiling. "A ladle of all things," cried Henry. "Where did you get it?" "I found a tin cup at the dump," said Jessie. "We used a long stick for a handle and tied it to the cup with a piece of wire. It makes a fine ladle." She ladled out the stew onto plates and bowls and put a spoon in each. Oh, said Benny, "I'm so hungry. I must eat my supper." The meat was well cooked and the vegetables were delicious. Violet passed her plate for some more turnips. "I'd like some more onions," said Henry. All the children ate till they could eat no more. "That was the best meal I've ever eaten," said Jessie. "Me too," said Violet. "I have time tonight to make Benny's cart," remarked Henry. "We'll want a cart." "Will you make it with my wheels?" asked Benny. "Yes, with your wheels," answered Henry. "But you must cart stones in it when I get it done." "Yes," said Benny, "I will cart stones or rocks or anything." "Tomorrow will be Sunday and I can stay at home," Henry went on. Do you think it's all right, Jessie, to build a dam for a swimming pool on Sunday? Yes, I do, said Jessie. We are making the swimming pool so that we can keep clean. Henry began happily to hammer out the bent nails with his new hammer. Soon he had some good nails. You and I will go and find some boards, Benny, he said. Come on. Soon the boys came back with some boards from the dump. Henry sat down and began to make a cart. He could not see very well because it was getting dark, and there was no moon. But at least the cart was done, and he gave it to Benny. Thank you, said Benny politely. After his sisters had admired the cart, Benny pulled it around just for fun. Then Henry put it in the boxcar for the night. Henry said to Jessie, I hope we do not hear that queer noise tonight. I hope not too, said Jessie. Then she laughed. Look at Benny, she said. He has gone to sleep with his hand on his cart. Henry laughed too, but he laughed at himself because he was going to sleep with his new hammer under his pillow. Chapter 8. A Swimming Pool at Last. The boxcar children were so tired that they slept till 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Here's what the new chapter looks like. When they woke up at last, they hurried through breakfast and went to work on the swimming pool. We'll make a dam across the brook, said Henry. Here's my cart, said Benny. I'll cart stones and logs in it. Good for you, laughed Henry. First, the 4 children went down to the brook to look at the pool Jessie had seen. The water was quiet there, and clean sand was all around the little pool. It's big enough for a swimming pool, Henry remarked, but I don't think it's deep enough. He put a long stick into it to see how deep it was. When he looked at the wet stick, he found that the water was about a foot deep. The swimming pool should be 3 times as deep, he said. Then there'll be enough to swim in, but it won't be too deep for Benny. We'll build the dam here with logs and stones. While the other children started the dam, Jessie washed all their stockings. We won't want our stockings on when we're working in the brook, she remarked, as she rinsed them and hung them on the clothesline to dry. So this is a good time to wash them. It was hard work building the dam, but the children liked the hard work. Henry and Jessie pulled the logs to the brook, and Violet and Benny carried the stones with the help of the cart. Now and then Henry was called on to help with a heavy stone, but the 2 younger children carried most of them. Splash the stones right into the water, Henry told them, but be careful to keep them in line between these 2 trees. The children watched with delighted eyes as the wall of stone under the water began to grow higher and higher. The stone wall will help hold the logs in place, said Henry. At last it was time to lay the logs across the brook. Let's lay the first ones between these 2 trees, said Jessie. Then the trees will hold both ends of the logs. Good work, cried Henry, much pleased. That's just what we'll do. But when the first big log was splashed into place on top of the stone wall, the water began to run over the top of the log and around both ends. Oh dear, cried Jessie, the water runs around the ends every time. What shall we do? We'll have to put a lot of logs on with brush between them, said Henry. We'll put on so many that the water can't get through. They laid 3 logs across with 3 more on top of them and 3 more on top of those. Violet filled her arms with brush and held it in place until each log was laid. Benny filled the holes at the ends of the logs with flat stones. Such wet children never were seen before, but the hot sun would dry them off and no one cared. When the 3 top logs were laid in place at last, the 4 tired children sat down to watch the pool fill. But Henry couldn't sit still as the water became higher and higher up the dam. See how deep the pool is getting, he cried. See how still it is? At last the pool was full and the water came over the top of the dam and made another waterfall. Just like mill dams, said Henry. Now the pool is deep enough for all of us to swim in. You boys can have the first swim, said Jessie. We girls must go and get dinner. We'll ring the bell when we're ready. The boys splashed around in the pool while the girls made a fire and hung the kettle of brown stew over it, stirring it now and then. Violet cut the bread and then got the butter hard and cold out of the refrigerator. When everything was ready, Jessie rang the dinner bell. This bell was only a tin can from the dump. Jessie had hung it on a tree with a string, and she rang it with a spoon. Then she got the ladle and began ladling out the stew. "That's the dinner bell," said Benny. "I know it is. Come, Watch, don't you want to have some dinner?" Watch had had a swim too. He came out of the water and shook himself. The two boys put on their dry clothes and went to Sunday dinner. "Let me ring the bell again," said Benny. "I like stew even better today," said Henry, eating hungrily. "That's because we work so hard," remarked Jessie. "Let's go for a walk in the woods this afternoon." "Oh, let's," cried Violet. "Let's go exploring again." The children washed the dishes and then started out on their walk. As they went along, Watch began to bark. At first the explorers were frightened. "Oh, what is it?" cried Violet. "Maybe it's a rabbit," said Henry. And then they saw a hen running away through the woods. Here's a little picture of Watch chasing the hen. Watch ran after her, but Henry called him back. "Don't run after that poor hen," he said. "The hen had a nest," remarked Benny. "What?" asked Jessie. "She had some eggs in it too," said Benny. "Come here and see." Jessie looked on the ground where Benny was pointing and saw a nest with 5 eggs in it. "A runaway hen," said Jessie. "She wanted to hide her nest so she could have some chickens. We'll have the eggs for supper. I know how to cook eggs." The eggs made a delicious supper. Jessie put them in a bowl with a little salt, and Violet took a spoon and stirred them as hard as she could. "Pour in some milk, Violet," said Jessie, "and stir them some more." Henry started up the fire, and the big kettle was hung over the fire. And Jessie put in some butter. She watched the butter until it was nice and brown, and then she put in the eggs. "Sit down," she said. "Be all ready to eat when the eggs are done." Violet put the blue tablecloth on the ground. She got bread and butter and the plates and spoons, and the children sat ready for supper. "Here I come," said Jessie. "Hold out your plates." "Oh, Jessie," cried Benny, "this is the best meal I ever ate. I found the eggs, and you cooked them." "Yes, you did, Benny," said Henry. "Thank you for the fine meal. Tomorrow we'll have bread and milk," said Jessie. But when tomorrow came, the children had more than bread and milk, as you will soon see.